Welcome. I'm your host, Mitch Dunford, and today we're kicking off a brand new podcast series focused on environmental and pollution risk, an area that is becoming increasingly critical for business and the risk and insurance professionals that protect them. To host this series, I'm thrilled to have two friends of the Alliance who live and breathe environmental risk, Chris and Brooks Bunbury. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you leading this series.
Thank you, Mitch. Really glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch.
You bet. Yeah, we're delighted to have you do this. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let me just introduce these two gentlemen real quick and then give them a chance to talk about themselves for just a second so y'all get to know them. Chris is the president of Environmental Risk Managers, Inc. and Environmental Strategist, Inc. He is a nationally recognized speaker and has been a leader in environmental insurance since the late 1980s. I almost said 1800s, Chris.
Well, it might be appropriate.
Yeah, we're both in that same seat. Joining him is his son, Brooks Bunbury, a partner at Environmental Risk Managers, Inc. Brooks graduated from Western Michigan University with a degree in finance and has more than a decade of experience helping businesses manage environmental risk. His work spans a wide range of industries, from brownfields and remediation contractors to ag, real estate, manufacturing, municipalities, and more. Today, and over the span of this podcast series, we're going to dive into what environmental strategy really means, why understanding pollutants matter, and how risk and insurance professionals can help their insureds avoid environmental exposure. So let's get started. Gentlemen, Chris, let's start with you and then go to Brooks.
All right.
Tell us a little bit about yourselves, your background, your upbringing, your educational journey, and why you chose environmental strategy as your career focus.
I grew up in Rockford, Michigan, and a few generations before I was there, my family started a leather tanning business. And that leather tanning business later turned into what people might know as Hush Puppy Shoes. And today it's known as Wolverine Worldwide. Well,
Wow.
when I was 16 years old, unfortunately, my brother passed away. My older brother passed away from cancer. And that really, unbeknownst to me at the time, that's when God put me on my environmental strategist path. And we skip forward to today and we take a look at Wolverine Worldwide. And over the past several years, Wolverine has paid out tens of millions of dollars in cancer-related claims and cleanup for PFAS contamination and other things that took place through the tannery operations. Not that anybody thought they were doing anything illegal at the time or against the regulations, but people just didn't really know any better what was going on. So these opportunities that I had growing up as a youngster kind of led to me at Michigan State getting a Bachelor of Science degree in Natural Resources. And then upon entering the property and casualty industry in the late 80s, it's when the environmental industry really kind of re-evolved, if you will. So it was a natural transition for me to move into the environmental space and use that to separate myself away from competitors in the commercial property and casualty field. And I really learned early on that most people didn't have much of an understanding about how environmental issues impacted them. And so it was really a requirement to educate businesses so they could understand the value that environmental insurance could bring to the table. And today we point out that, if you want to be successful in the insurance space, environmental insurance space, you don't sell environmental insurance. What you do is you educate the insureds so they can make an informed decision if investing in pollution insurance will add value to their business model or not. So from that, what I did is in 1992, I realized that there are a lot of retail agents out there that really needed to understand and help their clients in the environmental space. So I started Environmental Risk Managers, which operates as an environmental wholesaler, and we work on a countrywide basis with retail insurance agents around the country, assisting them with their clients' environmental insurance needs. And so here we are today having our podcast, and it's been a long journey of 35 plus years, but I'm thrilled that we have the opportunity to bring out to the masses how they can help their clients proactively address their issues through our Environmental Strategist podcast.
That's such an interesting back. Your family started Hush Puppy Shoes.
Correct.
That's crazy. Wow. How interesting. Brooks, what about you?
Well, my story definitely lacks the passion of Chris's, but growing up, I had the pleasure of listening to Chris talk about environmental insurance and exposures on a daily basis. So to say my interest in the industry growing up was lukewarm would be pretty generous. But no, in all seriousness, after graduating from Western Michigan University, I spent some time working for Boeing on the Ares rocket program, and then more recently working in South Florida for CB Richard Ellis doing commercial real estate market analysis. Early 2014, when Chris reached out to me, he wanted to put together a growth plan and pitch it to investors and stuff and try to really get things cranking. So I helped him put it together, and we got done. I looked at it, I go, that looks pretty good. You think you can do that? He goes, I know, I'm going to do it. And I said, all right, well, cancel all your meetings you had scheduled. I'm moving home. And I put in my 2 weeks, and by spring of 2014, we were off to the races.
That's cool. I hear you just had a baby about a year ago, right?
Yeah, my wife Amy and I, little baby Betsy, number one. So that's been cool.
That's awesome. Well, here at the Alliance, we've been working with Chris for a number of years, and not only is he super smart and super talented in this topic, but he's a good guy and a delight to work with, and which means a lot. And so we're just delighted to have you both hosting this series, and we think it's going to add a lot of value to our industry. So why'd y'all want to start this podcast?
Today, we have the opportunity with podcasts to really be able to get out to the masses and really zero in to those businesses and individuals who can benefit from the education that we have available out there. And here I am all these years later, and still education is the key to environmental. I mean, our research at Environmental Risk Managers shows that fewer than 20% of licensed insurance professionals are actively working in the environmental space. And yet 100% of their commercial insureds are impacted by environmental exposure. So we have a big upside here. And this podcast opportunity really is, I think, a great way for us to be able to bring the message out to the masses.
And so I just want to add on to that too. I know myself, busy schedules, prints on the decline. People are really trying to gather information on the go. And so utilizing audio sources, with podcasts being a highly popular and preferred platform. So when Chris said, hey, what do you think about a podcast? I think people will listen to it because they'll actually have time.
Yeah, it's easy. You jump in your car, you turn it on. When you drive to the store, you can listen. Yeah, and it aligns perfectly with our mission here at the Alliance to elevate everyone in the industry through education. And it's more than just our curriculum. It's also a podcast just like this. So let me ask you a follow-up question. Who should listen to this podcast, and what will this series, and what will they gain from listening?
Excellent question. And the way I like to answer that, Mitch, is let's take a look at what an environmentally reactive business is going to do when all of a sudden they find out they have an environmental liability. Probably the first person they're going to call is their attorney. After they call their attorney, they're going to call their insurance agent to see if they happen to have any coverage. When the agent tells them they don't, they're going to call their attorney back to sue the agent. They need to have an accountant who can accurately identify, now that they have this financial obligation, what their position is. Generally, they're going to be surprised that they're self-insuring their exposure, so they need to go to their financial institution to come up with the money to take care of it. However, most banks, when they find out they have a client with an environmental problem, their strategy is to call all notes due and sever the relationship. You need to have your environmental emergency response team, environmental engineers, and some of your own employees. And that's who makes up your environmental management strategy team, which is critical to be able to gather the information you need, because there is no one-stop shop to be able to gather all your information. Your team of specialists, attorneys, bankers, accountants, realtors, business owners, risk managers, those are all podcast listeners who will benefit from this.
So let's dig into more of the details. So environmental strategists deal with pollutants. And this has always been really interesting to me. When you think of pollutants, you think of gasoline or acid or things like that. But what is a pollutant, and who should know about pollutants, and why is that important to know?
When you take a look at an insurance policy, it describes a pollutant as smoke, soot, vapors, fumes, acid, alkalis. Well, I'm not a scientist, and I'm assuming most people listening to this podcast aren't scientists either. So, based upon the way insurance companies and courts have responded to claims in the past, environmental strategists has come up with a definition of a pollutant we think is much easier to understand. And quite simply, a pollutant is a material, substance, liquid, or product which gets introduced to the environment for other than its intended use or purpose. So, in other words, something that ends up where it doesn't belong. In one situation, we had fresh water. And fresh water was accidentally put into a saltwater aquarium, and it killed off some of the aquatic life. And when a claim was filed, the claim was denied, saying that the fresh water was a pollutant. In another situation, we had cheese. And what happened was a cheese delivery truck got into an accident. It caught on fire. The cheese melted, went down in the sewer systems and coagulated and caused sewer backups. So when a claim was filed, the claim was denied, saying that the cheese was a pollutant. So we want people to understand that it's not just some cancer-causing, skin-burning chemical that is a pollutant. It can be something as simple as fresh water. And then along those same lines, what we need to understand too is we got to break down the barriers and just come to the reality that each and every one of us is a polluter. If you breathe air and you drink water, you pollute. The challenge that we face is how can we pollute in a way that has the least amount of negative impact on human health and the environment. And that's what each of these podcasts we're going to be going over is we're going to teach people how to proactively manage their environmental issues, because we've learned today that those businesses that have an environmental management strategy outperform their competitors. And what we've seen over the years, if you will, is the environmental movement started back in the 70s, and it was a litigation-based business model that they built this on. Well, what we know today is that litigation is very expensive, time-consuming, constrained resources, and rarely are the desired outcomes achieved. So we can avoid litigation. You're starting out way ahead of the pack. And that's what we do as environmental strategists, is we assist them to be able to get out ahead of the competition and to use environmental stewardship to a competitive advantage.
You've mentioned before that most insureds are unknowingly self-insuring because they think the CGL will address their environmental exposures. What's wrong with that thinking?
I'll hit on that one, Mitch. So it might come as a surprise, but the vast majority of CGL policies include an absolute pollution exclusion. So depending on the specifics of a specific claim, they can find a way to pull in some type of a pollutant being involved. They can immediately deny the claim, and they can do so very strongly, like no wiggle room, if you will. Pollution losses are typically high severity and they're unpredictable. So while they might not be, you might be talking to somebody else in your industry and they hadn't experienced it. When they do happen, they tend to be very, very expensive. I mean, when you have a pollution loss, you got to come in, emergency contractors, to get it under control. Then the EPA is going to come in. You have to do soil sampling, all that, put together a plan to clean it up. And then after it's even cleaned up, you have post-cleanup monitoring that can go on for years, if not decades. And that's in addition to any third-party bodily injury or property damage that it caused. Another issue with the CGL is defense costs and claims related to a pollution event, with it being excluded, can be super spendy. We see quite frequently what I consider nuisance claims as far as pollution goes. A neighboring property, manufacturer, or residential development finds pollution on their property, and they immediately sue the neighboring manufacturer, assuming that it must be them. And even if it's found not to be, that manufacturer has to put up all those funds to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And then lastly, and this pops up almost on a weekly basis, at least, it's the limited pollution liability that you'll see in a CGL policy. And that is pretty dangerous because they see the insured or the agent see limited and they see pollution. Well, they don't focus on that limited word. It's just we have pollution coverage, when in fact, the limited pollution liability coverages have so many tight parameters that need to be met in order for a claim to be covered that by default, almost 90% of actual claims they can then deny. The whole time that insured and agent were thinking, well, we got some pollution coverage, we're all set.
So what are the two main coverages in environmental?
So there's two primary coverages, and once those are placed, there are supplemental coverages that can be added to them, which we'll talk about in future episodes. But you have your environmental impairment liability, or what we also refer to as premise pollution liability. So this is going to ensure a fixed site, a location, and the operations going on at that location, i.e. manufacturing facility, a transfer facility, such as that. And it's also going to cover if neighboring properties were to pollute onto that property. So premise pollution, fixed site. The second coverage is contractors' pollution liability, which is the exact opposite. That is going to cover contractors while performing work in the field at third-party locations, should they cause a pollution event.
And if I could just interject too, the thing, you can have clients that can have both exposures, the site pollution and the contractor's pollution. The simple example I use are construction equipment rental companies, where the construction rental equipment company, where they store equipment, where they service equipment, where they fuel equipment at their own location, they'll want pollution coverage for that. But if they have a piece of equipment that's rented and it's out in the field and it breaks down, well, they'll send a mechanic out to do work on that equipment. Now they have a contractor's pollution exposure. And we have several markets out there that offer a combined form for those insureds that have that exposure, where they need to have both the site pollution and the contractor's pollution combined together.
Terrific. So what exactly is an environmental strategist?
Yeah, environmental strategists coach businesses on their environmental exposures so they can be more competitive in today's business environment. And that really is the bottom line. And as the environmental strategist, as we pointed out earlier, you need to pull your team together, your team of attorney, banker, accountant, realtor, employees. And as the environmental strategist, you are the team leader directing those other professionals who collectively you assist your clients to be able to take their environmental exposures and use them to a competitive advantage. As I mentioned, the early environmental movement was really litigation based. And today, what we've learned is that we want to move away from a litigation based business model, because we don't need to have our resources stressed and everything else that happens. And so the analogy that I use for an environmental strategist is that the computer industry created demand for the IT profession. And today's transparent business economy is creating demand for environmental strategists. And a simple example I can give you, and this is one that involved Ford, and it was a few years ago, and Ford Motor Company had a supplier that supplied die-cast magnesium components who had a fire at their facility, and it interrupted their ability to be able to supply parts to Ford, and it shut down Ford's truck division, of which they lost production of about 70 to 80,000 vehicles, because they didn't have a backup vendor in line to take care of should that primary vendor have a loss. And that's just a simple example. You would think Ford would be sophisticated and not have that situation take place, but they did. And so we coach businesses on how to try to avoid those specific type of exposures. And the one thing I'm really excited about, and when you're able to partner with the Alliance, is that we have our certified environmental strategist online on-demand training that comes with 4 hours of CE for professionals to be able to achieve that. And in the end, you achieve your certified environmental strategist designation so you can market and promote that you have the ability to assist clients and proactively addressing their environmental exposures.
That's awesome. So, a question for you both is what can we expect in the future episodes of this series?
Well, obviously, what we've been doing here today, Mitch, is we've just been doing kind of an aerial overview of environmental strategists and what we do. And future podcasts, we're really going to do deep dives into a variety of different areas. We'll be meeting with different team members during these podcasts. We'll be talking to attorneys. We'll be talking to insurance carriers, environmental engineers. We'll be discussing brownfields, environmental financial assurance, environmental due diligence, and talking about a variety of exposures that impact a lot of businesses out there, from PFAS chemicals and stormwater runoff and natural resource damages, just a whole wide variety of issues that are out there. So we're going to expand and also bring some new things in there. Like we have an environmental risk managers, a special program, environmental program for high net worth insureds. A lot of people don't think about high net worth insureds with an environmental exposure, but at environmental risk managers, we see the need that they have, and really high net worth insureds are industry disruptors out there. So we're going to be covering a wide spectrum of environmental exposures and everything to be able to help people to be able to take a proactive approach to dealing with the environmental issues that impact their operations.
That's terrific. And we really appreciate you both and your willingness to do this to help educate our industry. And we're looking forward to it. So that wraps up this first episode in our Environmental Strategist podcast series here on Alliance Insights. A huge thank you, like I said, to the both of you, Chris and Brooks, for sharing your experience and hosting this series. If you'd like to learn more about environmental risk managers, you can hop over to their website at ermi.us. And also, if you're interested in the Environmental Strategist certification program that Chris just mentioned, offered in partnership with the Alliance, visit the Alliance website at risk-education.org/environmental-strategist, or just hop onto Google and Google Environmental Strategists and it'll take you right there. Be sure to subscribe to Alliance Insights podcast on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. Share this episode with your colleagues and leave us a review. Until next time, I'm Mitch Dunford. Thank you for listening.